So today we are going to talk about the fascinating topic about trauma. With me is Kashika. Could you briefly introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, Akash. I'm Kashika. I'm a trauma-focused psychotherapist in private practice. I completed my master's in clinical psychology from Christ, Bangalore. I'm also qualified for UGC NET along with GRF. And I work mainly using a psychodynamic trauma-focused lens. So I
Right.
work with adults in individual psychotherapy, and I've been doing that for a couple of years now.
Right. So let's start with the big question. What exactly is trauma in psychological terms?
Sure. A very important question at that, because I know that sometimes we confuse trauma from traumatic events. So I'll also
Yeah.
clarify that. I explain this. So trauma is less about what happens on the outside to us.
Hmm.
That is a factor, but it's mainly about the internal experience of it.
Right.
So the main differentiating factor when it comes to something being traumatic or not is whether our bodies were able to deal with it in a constructive way. So, for example, when we are really, really young, let's say if there is a child and they witness their parent being really rageful, being really angry, a 3 or 4 year old child may not have the kind of language to describe what they're seeing. They might feel that something that they have done wrong is leading to the anger. They may not have people around them to tell them that, okay, it's not your fault. Exactly. They may not have the words to express what's going on with them, and that whole thing feels really threatening to their nervous system. But if we compare it with, let's say, there being a 20-year-old person in this
Hmm.
child's place, that person will have more resources in order to reassure themselves that it's not about me. This person is having an episode of rage, and things will calm down after a while. It's not as threatening to me or to my identity. So, whether we are equipped to deal with that experience or not in the first place is the major determinant of something being traumatic for us or not.
Right.
So when something is traumatic, it's very, very hard to integrate into our minds, into our bodies when it's happening, which is why therapy can really help with this integration.
Hmm.
Because there are fragments of our experiences. Something is going on in the body and our mind doesn't. There is a disconnect. Something is going on in the mind, but the body is not able to sit with that sensation or that feeling. So there is a disconnect there. It can show up in many different ways in different
Hmm.
people. So therapy, the major aim of therapy, of trauma-focused therapy, then becomes the integration of what has been left unintegrated. So yeah.
Right. So if unresolved trauma causes so many issues, why is it that our brain hides it from us, so to speak?
So if we see that our bodies are wired for survival,
Yeah.
and our brain and our bodies will do everything that they can in order to help us survive. For instance, if it's somebody, they may not have a full recollection of what happened to them, and the
Mm.
brain has disconnected us from the memory of that event, which happens quite frequently. um, it can be a way to help them go on. Because
Mm.
just imagine if this person were to actually experience the full force of what has happened to them, and the memory were to be with them at that point, it must be really overwhelming for them to carry on and then survive.
Mm.
Because the pull is so threatening, the body is in a constant state of threat, that the best way that our system feels to protect itself is to not recollect what happened.
Mm.
So in a lot of ways, that disconnect is actually really, really protective. But when it keeps on happening, even when the event has ended and we are in other situations in our life, it keeps on happening because it expects something
Right.
traumatic to happen again. it keeps showing up. The disconnect keeps showing up.
Mm.
And that is when it becomes unhelpful or even
Right.
harmful to an extent to us. Yeah.
So as the phrase goes that the body keeps the score, so is this why integration is so required?
It's important to, or if I may say, that digesting an experience to its full extent is
Mhm.
what we are wired for as human beings. We are very social by nature. Um, so our entire life is around relationships with people.
Mm.
We are born in communities, especially countries like India, South Asian countries. We are born in communities. We exist in communities. So all that is really, really important. And um, it then makes a lot of sense that the trauma also resides in the communities, how we have experienced
Mm.
relationships, how we have experienced ourselves in those relationships. Those blueprints stay with us.
Right.
And when we the body keeps the score, it's not like the body is storing something in itself or in one body part and that needs to be released. I know that social media may portray that image of body keeping the score, but it's more like patterns being stuck in the body,
Mhm.
like patterns of response. So, for example, if I am somebody who is used to not sharing what I really, really feel in a relationship, let's say with my friends or with a partner or somebody, I might experience a lot of discomfort
Mm.
internally in my body when I'm not able to speak up. But speaking up is also really hard for me because I've
Mm.
never learned it. Or whenever I have tried it, it's not led to good consequences, which is why I've never tried it again.
Mm.
So that discomfort in the body indicates something about the experience that you've had in the past.
Right.
So we repeat, unconsciously, we repeat what has happened to us in the
Mm.
past in order to change something about it. So, which is
Right.
why when we say that the body keeps the score, it means that those patterns create a home within us
Mm.
and they get replayed in many different situations. And that is, that is why we call it pattern and understanding the pattern, breaking the pattern. All these things come under that.
Is there such a thing as big trauma and small trauma, or is it relative to the person?
There is a lot of research about it. I know that in a lot of circles there is research about big T trauma being sexual abuse, near-death incidents, or really fatalistic incidents, basically, and
Mm.
small T trauma being something like maybe bullying, which doesn't threaten the life of the person exactly.
Mm.
But in my clinical experience, I can talk about that. I've seen that the event, while it is important, it's a big factor in what in how a person experiences themselves. But along with that, how we experience it is also really matters. For instance, if somebody has, let's say, been through a really difficult near-death experience in their life, for example, they've met with a really bad accident,
Mm.
and they've had a lot of support with them, like supportive friends and family, and really speedy access to healthcare, then the impact of that event will be much lesser on them. Of
Mm.
course, that's one factor. There'll be other things
Mhm.
also. But on another side, if let's say I've experienced bullying in school, but I had nobody to share it with, I had nobody to talk to about it, and it kept on happening for a long time, even though it will be classified as a small t trauma, but the impact of it will be so huge on me because it was so invisibilized. Nobody saw it. I could not share it.
Mm.
So it will just stay with me. I had no support there. So that is why, even though the classification also exists for other like research purposes to, maybe like separate the effects of both these events, clinically, we also see that the manifestation is more important than what actually
Mm.
happened because we can't really
Right.
go back and change what has happened, but we
Mm.
can work with its manifestations.
Right. And also that some people are more sensitive than others, so it's really subjective, right?
Yeah, a lot of it is also like biologically, genetically determined, how much
Mm.
we experience. Yeah.
Okay, so what exactly is PTSD under the umbrella of trauma?
So PTSD is a diagnostic term used by the DSM, the ICD, which are
Mm-hmm.
classificatory manuals in psychopathology. PTSD means post-traumatic stress disorder, which means that a really big event has happened. And after that event has happened, it's led to a lot of different complications in the person, starting from hypervigilance, that, something of, if we see something very similar to what has happened to us, let's say if I've
Mm-hmm.
been involved in a really bad accident, let's take that example again, and if I see a car, I might feel really anxious because that memory is still there with me somewhere, that I was hit by a car or something. So that hypervigilance is there, a tendency to avoid the triggers. Like I would run away from cars. I would not want to be anywhere near to them. And there are a few clinical diagnostic markers to diagnose somebody with PTSD. But the differentiating factor then here is that PTSD can be diagnosed when you've met with a really the big T trauma that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
When there is big T trauma, only then can we diagnose somebody with PTSD. It has
Right.
roots in America, as you know, because this construct was built in America through DSM and all.
Mm.
That time there was war going on in the US, and people were seeing that people who were back from the war, they had something called the shell shock syndrome,
Mm.
that they had been exposed to such difficult circumstances in the war that when they came back, they had difficult dreams of being in that situation again, and really not wanting to engage with people, finding it really difficult to go back to their life the way it was after having experienced all of that. So that is when PTSD slowly evolved to be a diagnosis.
Right. How does integration therapy work exactly?
So when it comes to integration, it's a slow process. Like any therapy or any concern, when we work with trauma, we hold it very delicately
Mm.
because the nervous system is already very overwhelmed, and processing something takes a lot of mental and body energy. And it's something that we actually get to based on the person sitting in front of us. So, while it's usually recommended that we check for the safety of the person sitting in front of us, like how safe they're feeling in the therapeutic relationship. Do they feel safe enough to talk about really difficult things? Or are we building the rapport, helping them get accustomed to the process of therapy? Because for many people, coming and talking to somebody about their deepest concerns is very, very difficult.
Mm.
So just reaching out in itself is really tough. So we make sure to take it very slow.
Mm.
And this integration happens over time as they also experience a relationship that is safe,
Mm.
that can contain their emotions, hold who they are as a person, instead of again traumatizing them.
Mm.
So, for instance, if I've been a part of really difficult relationships where nobody understood me and I was left feeling lonely, entering therapy and seeing that my therapist really understands me, that is a big step for me. That is such a big repair for me from my past relationships that now I can see myself differently. Oh, this person is able to understand. That means something is not wrong with me, as I have come to believe over time, maybe.
Right.
So, slowly, as the relationship builds, we get to experience something different about ourselves and our relationships. And the processing of what has happened in the past, that may or may not be the step in therapy.
Mm.
Not everybody wants to go ahead with unpacking what has happened in the past. Even safety work can sometimes help clients a lot. So it's really a matter of choice,
Mhm.
how the person wants to engage in therapy, if the person is safe enough to engage in such deep body based work, because going back to the bodies can also be very overwhelming. So there are many, many, many options available, and we use them based on the client's wish or
Mm.
readiness in therapy.
Right. Okay. And what is one thing about trauma that you would like people to know?
I think when we hear the word trauma, we always assume that the other person has had it worse. Or we've unfortunately heard that statement from so many people that you should get over what you've experienced because, see, this other person has experienced so much worse than you.
Mm.
But I really want people to know that trauma doesn't mean, like we initially spoke about, it's not as much about what has happened, but it's much more about what has stayed with you from that experience.
Right.
So the experience of trauma may not always be proportional to what has happened on the outside. So comparison, theoretically, it would not make sense
Mm.
that if a person has had it worse than me, then why am I feeling this way? I shouldn't be feeling this way.
Mm.
I've heard of so many people who experience that thought. But I would just like for people to know that the way you are experiencing something or you have experienced something, that in itself is really, really important. It's about you, what you have experienced, and how you would like to live your life moving forward. So, even though we've been habituated to such messages from so many people around us, I really want people to know that it's actually not about what has happened, but more about what has lingered on.
My last question to you would be, how can a person reach out to you for your professional services?
So, you can contact me via email. My email ID is kashikasachdeva.work@gmail.com. If not email, then you can also contact me on LinkedIn. I am there with the name of Kashika Sachdeva. You will find my ID pretty easily there if you search it. So yeah, I'm also on Instagram by the name of
Mm.
selfunabridged.kashika. It's a bit tricky, but if you search my name again, it'll show up. So yeah,
So, any
that's
special kind of services that you provide?
so I provide individual psychotherapy to adults. So 18 to 45 years of age is the age
Mm-hmm.
bracket in which I see clients.
Right.
I work with different concerns. So, yeah, I'm a counseling psychologist, so I may not be the person if you need a diagnosis or medication.
Mm-hmm.
For that, you might have to reach out to a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist, respectively. But I provide talk therapy, and I also use body-based techniques to
Mm.
increase the depth of the therapy process.
Hey, Kashika, it was such an honor to have you on the platform.
The
We learned
pleasure
so
is all
much.
mine. No problem. Thank
Thank
you.
you.